Hello YouTube, D-Man Biker here again, and just want to show you this new tank I've been making. This is the A4 version. It's called the SH17. The pun is intended. It's a direct evolution from the SH21B you always see featured here. It's essentially very similar angles, but it's in a much smaller package. Mounts a 100mm gun with reasonable frontal protection arc. It's gone through quite a few changes. I'm just going to talk about frontal lower plate, 200 millimeters, angled back at 65 degrees, giving us 473 millimeters of effective armor. This used to be 220 millimeters, but I found I could get away with just 200 pretty easily. I tested it by shooting it. I think it took 27 hits from a 100mm cannon with 200 penetration, and I just tried to match up the health with the armor to see how fast the health degrades versus the armor, and it seems like 200 is pretty good armor value for this. Maybe even lower would work. The SH21B, this plate, which is angled the same, is 150 millimeters. So the main reason you might want to have a higher, because like obviously you're not going to be getting hit by a cannon that has 473 millimeters of penetration. I mean, you might be, but most likely if you're fighting the same tonnage tank, that you're not going to. But as this thing gets hit, the armor stat decreases. It degrades with the health. So if this was only like 100 millimeters or something, after just a few hits, it would only be like 75 effective or something. So you do need to have a higher armor value for multiple hit potential. Also, this tank weighs 43 tons. Some other versions weigh 45, some weigh 40. I'm aiming for 40. Further versions might lighten it a little bit. We've got a upper plate, glacis, 70 millimeters, but it's angled at a whopping 87 degrees. So, yeah, this is not going to get penetrated. But the reason why I made it 70 millimeters instead of less is because if someone was aiming down at it like this, which is a common thing in tank battles, if someone has the higher ground, you need to have a little bit more armor protection. Later versions are probably going to incorporate a second plate here, kind of. That's probably like 100 millimeters thick, and then this is probably going to be thinner because it's not realistic that people are going to hit up here as much as up here, and that might help lighten the load a little bit. Front of the turret is 250 millimeters, which is pretty damn thick, giving us 550 millimeters of effective armor. This is a trapezoid prop. It does not use viz clip. This plate up here used to be 40 millimeters, but I found it would get blown off very easily, so it's now 100 millimeters, and that's mainly if people are engaging you from above. We have these side cheek pieces, which are technically weak spots, 250 millimeters, angled back. I just mainly did this because having all these normal square turrets looks kind of stupid, but I may change the turret design on this tank in later versions. Maybe incorporating like a wedge shape, kind of like this, like a sort of like a Leopard 2. So Leopard 2's turret is completely flat on the front, but it has like very thick composite armor, essentially, like ridiculous. Like the actual blocks are like over 600 millimeters. And then if you look at later versions after like the A4, they've got like this wedge on the front, and that's just like a spaced armor wedge that's supposed to break at penetrators. It wouldn't really work quite that way in ACF because there's nothing like that, but it could definitely help with the armor values. Right now, I do have these spaced armor shrouds here, which are 100 millimeters, just to help give these extra hit potential. But in a longer range fight, which this is more intended for, I'm not too worried about weak spots like that. Unless they're not even really weak spots, you'd have to hit them multiple times. We have, this has gone through a lot of power plant changes. Right now I'm set on the 21-liter V12 diesel. The original version was actually powered by a large electric motor, because I have a light tank that uses an electric motor, and it was fairly effective. But for this tonnage of tank, it doesn't seem like it's that good. It has problems. It's not very fast. It has great smooth torque, so you don't get any jerking, but the electric motor doesn't. It seems like it's good for real light tanks or really heavy tanks, just because you don't get any of that jerking that's often associated. But with the tonnage of this tank, this one engine works very well. Plus, I can fit the transmission in the back here with it. The electric motor, the transmission fit also, but it had to be put upright, and it was kind of awkward. I also tested a experimental version that used a V8 petrol engine and a large standalone motor, and it would switch between the two depending on the speed you're going, but I never quite got it working, mainly because ACF components don't always agree with what you're doing with wire, and they won't always respond accordingly when you're trying to get going. Like the electric motor wouldn't activate, and eventually I got it all working pretty seamlessly, but there were still problems, and it was just overly complicated. I think if I want to test out that propulsion method, I will want to make a new tank that's just built around that idea, because it was kind of awkward how it all fit back here. The front actually has a lot of extra space here if I wanted to add more armor or something. That's certainly possible, or I can add fuel up here, which is how the electric motor worked. The electric motor actually, when it was going lower speeds, would use electric, otherwise it would switch back, and that was fairly effective. This is one of the first tanks I've built with a real separate fighting compartment, which is in here. The only ammunition we have in here is for the machine gun. All the rest of the ammunition is actually stored in the turret. This is as of the A3 version, the turret was elongated. The turret used to only be this long. You can kind of see the line here. But the turret was elongated to accommodate all of the ammunition, so there's no ammo in the hull other than that machine gun ammo. It carries 11 heat rounds, 250 pen, and 16 AP rounds with 200 pen, which is a pretty decent ammunition loadout. 100mm gun, like I said before. This is my first tank where the seat, when you rotate the turret, the seat actually rotates with the turret, which is kind of cool. So the seat's always pointing wherever your turret's pointing, rather than just like sitting facing the same direction. So it actually moves around inside this ring. The original version had much smaller wheels, but I found it was very slow with much smaller wheels, if that makes sense, because I guess because the electric motor can only put out so many RPMs, and smaller wheels with each rotation move the vehicle less, so it was just very slow. So I added these larger wheels, and that significantly increased turning performance and overall speed. Maybe there's a better way to do it with smaller wheels, I don't know. Doesn't particularly matter to me. If we want to look at the original version of this tank, just for the evolution, here it is right here. See, smaller wheels, lots of them, makes it really hard to turn. We're mounting electric motor. With fuel at the front. This is actually the really early version. There's another version that has this extra spaced armor and stuff, but it's very similar, but you can definitely see the turret's very elongated on the second version there. And then also, if you want to know the side armor, we've got 20mm spaced armor around the tracks, and then it's 40mm on the inside. Most likely, if I am to upgrade this, I will actually increase protection around the crew compartment, like put maybe a 100mm piece here, and then actually decrease the protection like of this to maybe like 20mm, because there's nothing in here. There's no ammunition in here or anything. So I don't really. I mean, if someone's gonna shoot this in the side, they're gonna penetrate and they're gonna hit this. If they're shooting it at a glancing angle and it penetrates, it's just going to fly past all this stuff. So there's really no reason for this entire side to be 40mm. And it's actually composited with 30mm and 20mm plates higher up, because it's not a standard height. But there's really nothing in here to get hit, so might as well go with 100mm. The front of it is 100mm, but, you know, I didn't mean, when I said go with 100mm, I meant just 100mm in this little area. And the rest of this can be much thinner. let's go ahead and just demonstrate our mobility really quick. The diesel, I could show a comparison, I'm probably not going to. The diesel engine moves it actually about as fast as the electric motor, but the electric motor accelerated much slower, I guess you could say, which kind of makes sense. It doesn't really make that much sense, I guess, but also the electric motor just goes, it's this really annoying sound, which I definitely don't like. And it just seems, the diesel engine seems much more stable, and it also is significantly lighter. It was like 45 tons with the electric motor. It weighs about 43.8 with the diesel engine, so probably gonna stick with diesel. I might experiment with the hybrid propulsion electric diesel a little bit more, but just because ACF doesn't have any kind of an alternator or anything to charge your batteries, I just don't see that as being a super feasible way to power your tank either. At least efficiency-wise, it might be a good test though. But yeah, this tank uses the same my mobility chip, which basically it uses skid steering when you're just driving forward. Normally, it's using the brakes from the transmission, 15 on each side for this tank. And then if you hold space and turn, it actually locks the sides of the tracks with a weld latch. So you can get much tighter turns with your skid steering, which is nice. This turret chip is the newest iteration from Sir Daubers. For a turret chip, it has the ammunition counter and the HUD integrated in the same chip, and it also has some different features. It has a better lock-on when locking onto the hangar doors because they're an entity. It'll actually lock on like to a specific part of a tank. Like if you're looking at the back of a tank, it'll lock on there instead of just looking at the center of the entity. And it also has, this is cool, it has a ballistics trajectory calculator. If you press control, you turn it on and off, it'll figure out how high the gun needs to be in order to aim, which is a major advantage versus chips that don't have this, because any kind of trajectory means you have to bracket your target. You don't have to do that when the shell will just land roughly where you're aiming. It's not perfect, but it's significantly more accurate than not having it, which this chip is not available to the public right now just because it's got some ops issues. It's not totally it's not totally done yet. Right here you can see how massive that overhang on the turret is. It's huge. Haha, funny guy. Okay. 7.62 coaxial gun. I'm really liking how this tank's turning out. This is my first attempt at a tank that might be somewhat competitive. Maybe not too competitive, but it is supposed to be in the 40-ton class. I'd say that's pretty good armor, pretty good mobility, but it's much smaller than my other tanks, and it's definitely put together with a little bit more forethought than some of my other tanks. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this video. Have a good one.